Okay. Well, thank you everybody for joining us today. Appreciate you taking the time out of your day to join us for the MCB Lunch and Learn today. Our guest today is Mr. Andrew McCrea, and he's going to talk with us about Community Foundation and some of the things that you can do with an endowment for your community. So Andrew, I'll let you go ahead and take over.
All right, thank you. Well, good to be with you. And yeah, we're going to talk about mostly community endowments and things related to that. I'll have some slides here, and we're going to try to show video. We tested it, so hopefully everything will work here. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and hop right into some of the PowerPoint here. And we should be ready to go here in just a second. Let's see if it's going to happen or not. All right, let me get back up here. Okay, so we should be able to see the screen now, hopefully. So here we go. So yeah, if you need a title for today, we're going to talk about building local endowments and, you know, kind of moving people and places from ordinary to extraordinary, if you will. So my roots are in Northwest Missouri, on the farm, but certainly in small towns and helping small towns. But as many of you know, some of our small towns are, I guess, a bit in decline. I joke with folks that things are so bad in my hometown that we've had to put a second sheet of plywood on some of the vacant buildings. So, you know, I think that all of us can find places that we'd say, boy, I'd really love to do something to help, and other places that are shining spots. So it's not all bad, but I think we probably wouldn't be on this call if we weren't trying to help improve the places that we live. I'm going to start, though, with this story to kind of set the stage. Some of you may know this gentleman. His name's Jackie Moore, and Jackie helped establish the Joplin Regional Stockyards. And that Joplin Stockyards is the largest in Missouri, third largest stockyards in the nation. And if you know Jackie, Jackie is a very enthusiastic kind of guy, really a people person, gets out and talks with people. And that's probably why he built such a successful business. But we still use horses to round up cattle. And several years ago, we were needing to trade horses, and Jackie was talking with my dad, and Jackie said, you know, I've got a horse down here at the stockyards, work perfect for you guys. You should come down and look at it. So eventually we did. It wasn't a sale day, but we met Jackie at the sale barn, and he said, well, the horse is out back, but Jackie, in typical style, he was beginning to talk up the horse and everything this horse could do. It was just an amazing horse, all that he was able to accomplish in the stockyards, out in the pasture and so forth. Well, we finally get to the pen and we look at the horse, and the horse that's before us does not fit the description of everything Jackie has told us. It just does not look like a very muscular horse. He's not very big, nothing pretty to look at. My dad, as soon as Jackie gets done with his big spiel, says, Jackie, that horse is too little to do everything you've said. And in typical Jackie style, he said, I don't have a mirror back here. This horse hasn't seen himself. He doesn't know he's little. Well, we ended up buying the horse, and the horse was a great horse. Yeah, the horse could do everything Jackie had told us he could do. And the horse maybe wasn't that pretty to look at and didn't seem that big or tall or muscular, but he could do it. And I've many times laughed about that Jackie knew the horse and knew that he could do all that. But he said, you know, he had never seen himself. He didn't know he was little. And in my experience working with lots of different towns and sharing this kind of a message, people often ask, well, what's the most important thing that I could share? And it would be that is that a lot of places believe they're little. And they begin to believe the story that, well, we're too little to do that. We're too small to do that. We couldn't ever do something that bigger place did. And the truth is, as many times you can. It's just, I hate to say believing you can, because that just seems to make it sound like you think it and you can do it and it can happen. But certainly small places do make great things happen. So a lot of times it comes down to a question of why versus why not. You know, why did this happen? Why did people leave? Why did businesses close? Important questions to ask, but you've got to ask just as many why nots. What if, how can, because why not's a question that looks forward. And if you think about it, we in small towns often have a good way to look at life. I joke with people, we're but a small town when we look at the Dairy Queen, not as a place to eat, but as a tourist activity. You know, we see the possibilities. And if you see yourself as a small horse that can't do anything, then you're going to probably live up to that description. But if you're a little bit like Jackie and you see yourself as a bigger horse than perhaps you are, and that you can do a lot of things, then you'll probably live up to that description as well. So to set the stage for endowments, let me just share this. You know, rural communities often undervalue the benefits of their size. You know, we have local expertise, small size, the creativity, the monetary wealth. We'll talk about the wealth of knowledge, hard work. Small communities have many things going for them that large cities don't. And so to believe that we're a small horse or a small town and can't do it is in many cases wrong. You just have to look at the opportunities. As an aside, if you're looking for a good book to read sometime, I would highly suggest the book David and Goliath. It's by Malcolm Gladwell. Certainly it talks about the biblical story of David and Goliath, but really talks about smaller people, smaller towns, smaller things, and how they accomplish great things. And so if you're looking for something to kind of inspire you, I think that that's a good book. So how do communities accomplish turnarounds? Well, if we were doing a big program, we would talk about the economy and vibrant communities and the focus on the next generation, which is at least having a plan for what types of things we need to do. And all of these things are important. But what I think is key and critical, and what we're going to talk about in our time here at the Lunch and Learn is that bottom piece, but what else is needed? Because to accomplish many of these things, often it does require resources. And, you know, some of those resources certainly are monetary. And it's not that everything has to be done with money, but we would certainly agree that money does help. And so how can we do that? So one of the keys is having an endowment. I think many of us here on the Lunch and Learn probably understand a little bit about an endowment, but let me take 30 seconds. An endowment we would usually consider is a pool of money, be our principal, and we aren't going to touch that principal. That's the endowment. And we are going to then use the interest off that principal to fund certain projects. So very common for colleges and universities to have an endowment. And so they have a core principal, and then they're spending the interest off that to work on buildings and programs and so forth for colleges and universities. Some towns have them. In fact, some of you on this call may already have an endowment. Sometimes there's a family endowment. So a family decides that they want to do something for the future and set their own family endowment up that sends out certain funds. And so an endowment, I believe, is really key to making some of this happen. So let's talk about this for just a second, about scholarships and endowments. This is the time of year when graduations happen. And certainly we'll see graduations where a lot of scholarship money is given, and that's wonderful. And many times there are a lot of local scholarships dollars. And again, wonderful. Many times families and groups have come together to set up scholarships to help young people. The problem can be, though, is when a community has all of its money, I'm going to put that in quotes, all, theoretically, if they have lots of money in scholarships, but nothing in endowments, then we are helping fund young people to further education, which is wonderful. But we have not invested in the local community to give them a reason to come back. And I think that's critical. I know of one local town that has probably $250,000 worth of scholarship money. That would be their principal, but they have no local endowment. And so that was a conversation I was visiting with someone about, and said, that's great to have the $250,000 for scholarships, but probably something else has to be done to create the businesses, the amenities, the things that would help want to bring young people back, whether that's immediately or down the road. And so scholarships, again, nothing wrong with them, but very key to think about endowments. So that brings me to this town of Shickley, Nebraska, and that's a town I'm going to talk about here for a moment. Shickley, Nebraska, let me set the stage and then I'm going to show a video. Shickley, Nebraska, as you can see, a town of 341, and they were on the verge of probably losing their school. They had lost many businesses. The story goes that one day they'd had a funeral for a prominent, I believe, farmer in the community. The next day, the local banker and some others are sitting around the cafe, around kind of the community table. The local banker says something to the effect of, "You know what makes me mad? We have a funeral like we did yesterday, and eventually the heirs, the family members will come back to town. They'll settle up the estate. They'll come to the bank. They'll withdraw all the money and the CDs and so forth. And the last thing we'll see are their taillights heading out of town." He said, "Don't get me wrong." He said, "I'm not mad at them. That's their right to do with what they want to do with that family money." But he said, "I'm mad at all of us around the table because we've got to get busy telling our story. And if we don't tell our story, we're going to lose everything. That family grew up here. They lived here for many generations. They supported many local things. But if we don't get busy telling our story, we won't have any of that wealth here to help generate the things needed for a future generation to come back. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing the PowerPoint here for just a moment. I'll jump out of that, and I'm going to share the screen, and this should work. And this is a video that we shot. I work with Farm Journal on the media side, and for a show called American Countryside. But we do some pieces sometimes that we'll label Total Town Makeover, and at the end, I'll share where you can find these. So the video you're going to see, you can see online. That's where I'm going to play it from. But this is the story of Shickley and what they did in building their own endowment. So let me jump over here, and I think we can get to it right like this. I believe we're set. We tested the volume. It may be a little light, but I think we'll be able to hear it. So let's see if this will play. Shickley, Nebraska perhaps looks much like other small towns in the Midwest. There's a main street with a few businesses, a school, and community pride. When you actually count the number of residents, well, by most standards, it's a very small place.
We have 340 in town, and our school district, we figure there's about 630 people in our school district, and basically that's considered our community, our school district.
But Shickley, Nebraska is anything but small. They bill themselves as a big little town. Now return back the clock a couple of decades, and there may have been doubt if the town and school would survive. That's when local residents began the Shickley Community Foundation, a group with the purpose to raise money to support local causes, grow the community, and help businesses thrive.
We started raising a unrestricted endowment where we don't touch the principal, but we spend the interest each year in grants.
Several communities do something similar, but this town of 340 people was determined that they could truly change their future by investing in it locally.
Last grant cycle, we went over $570,000 that we've granted out in the last 20 years. In a community of 340 people, that's made a big impact.
That's over $500,000 in projects they funded just from the interest on the money they raised. But there's more. While they were raising funds for the endowment, they were also securing funds for other projects in town, such as a new community center and an attractive new Veterans Memorial. One major initiative was a partnership between the Shickley Community Foundation and the local school.
We've started a daycare center and an early education center, and that's really been a boon to the community. We have a number of young families moving to town, a number of young families staying in town because there's daycare.
Richard says the number one priority is to keep the local school operating, which they've done. And in the process, they found ways to provide the amenities that are attracting and retaining the future generation of residents. And they've done it all by sharing their story one-on-one with local families and securing donations that have in turn secured their future.
I told guys when we were in the middle of these campaigns, you know, if we would have tried to do some of this stuff with tax money, you'd have tarred and feathered us and wrote us out of town. But now you're helping us every chance you get, and it's because we're doing things that you want done, and you recognize the value in it.
There's still much work to be done, but when Richard walks these streets and reflects on where they began, this community truly has much for which to be thankful.
We've accomplished stuff that we'd have been afraid to dream of, you know, in the last 20 years.
Thanks to the work of the people of Shickley and the local community foundation, much has been accomplished. Local organizations have been supported, businesses have remained open, and young families have been inspired to make this their home. It truly makes this place a big little town. Traveling the countryside in Shickley, Nebraska, I'm Andrew McCrea. All right, so I like to joke and say somebody forgot to tell Shickley they were a little town. They are a little horse, but they didn't believe it. And they've got quite a story, and I'm going to continue to share here just a little bit. Let me jump back to this and move a couple things around. All right, so we should be back. I should be able to see that once again there. So yeah, 341 people. Here's what Shickley began to tie into, and this data is available to anybody in the state of Missouri. The community foundations in the state worked on this, and I understand that there's going to be new data that's coming out because this data here is probably 5 years old now. So down the left-hand side are the 18 counties in Northwest Missouri. I serve on the Community Foundation of Northwest Missouri, so that's our service area. So that's why those 18 are there. But again, this data would be available for any of the counties in the state. In red, I put my home county just so we had an example. And so the way this works is the transfer of wealth study. And this is the amount of assets they'll be transferring from one generation to the next, or on the sale from one person to another, but often it's from one generation to the next as it's inherited. So in Gentry County, the current value of assets, land, buildings, businesses, $450 million. That's the 0.45 billion there. Then as you work across in the next 10 years, it's expected that $160 million will change hands or transfer. And the idea of the community foundations of Missouri was, what if we captured 5% of that? We got out and told the story and said, would you consider giving 5% of those assets upon the transfer of death or whenever? Would you consider giving 5% to local causes? Well, if you captured 5% of the $160 million, 5% would be just under 8 million, the 7.94. And if that was your principal, then what interest could you generate? Well, if it was invested, and many community foundations, Community Foundation Northwest Missouri being one of them, can put that into pools of money and invest it. If you had 5% payout, that would be $400,000 per year, every year. That's the 0.4 million there. And then you can see for 50 years transfer of wealth, the numbers grow substantially. So 1.13 billion changes hands. 56 million is the 5% value. And if that was your principal, then it would pay out $2.83 million every year per year. Some people will say, well, that's fine, but there's no way you're ever going to capture 5%. And I would say, you're probably right. But the key is capture some percent, because if you're capturing zero, that is the taillights. Those are the taillights leaving town. And that's what's key. And this brings me back to this thing of the small horse. Sometimes we believe, well, I live in a small town. It's a small community. We have very little. But I would tell you that the wealth is there. And often in our smaller communities, that might be in land. It could be in farmland, but there's ag businesses and so forth. And so telling that story becomes critical. And many of those people have local ties. They may live there, but even for the ones that live far away, we'll talk about that in a second, there's still reason to capture some of that. And that's just what's key, is capturing some of that to help make this happen. Because let's be honest, at some point, the local community captured some of it to give to scholarships, because almost every single school has local scholarship money. So there was some reason that people gave to local scholarships. Again, nothing wrong with that, but they saw the need there. Now the need in many cases is, can we give to something local? And in my case, I would share that it could be an endowment. I would make it happen. So this is the group of folks in Shickley that made it happen. They built themselves as a big little town, pretty fitting for what they've done. I like to give a little money every year to Shickley, so I stay on their mailing list. I like to stay in touch with those folks. This is one of their newsletters pre-COVID, but I'm going to just read out of the center there. It says in 2019, grants will be awarded in April, October. To date, 351 grants totaling over $500,000 have been awarded. Another 77,000 will be dispersed next year. And then you can see, you can go to their foundation to keep informed. With your generous help, our goal is to have an endowment fund balance, including expectancies, of $8 million by the end of 2020. Together, this goal is very achievable. No donation is too small to make a difference. I can tell you that right now they have over $2 million in the bank. There's not been one huge donor that stepped forward to give any money. I mean, certainly they've had larger donors, but it's not like somebody gave $1 million, and that got them halfway there. That's not happened. So they have $2 million in the bank, and the $8 million is, it says expectancies. That's because they've had people who have contacted them and said, this is set up in our will, this money is coming to you. And so they don't know exactly how much that will be, but they believe that that will be about $8 million. So at $2 million, you can see already they're giving away $77,000. That was in 2019. So that number continues to grow. But when they hit 8 million, the 5% payouts, $400,000 per year, every year in a town of 341. That's why when Richard said, you would have tarred and feathered us if we'd have tried to do this through taxes, but now you give it willingly. I normally don't say a lot about taxes, not that I'm against using tax money to be able to do these things, but I'm just giving you the case of, what if you had nothing and you had to start this way? Interestingly, in Shickley, they generate more money off their endowment than the town generates in local taxes. So now who, in a sense, is calling the shots? It's the local endowment can really drive a lot of what happens. Certainly the city still has to take care of streets and sewers and things like that. But it's the other stuff that oftentimes is critical in getting people back. Certainly you've got to have sewers and streets, but sewers and streets everybody has, they got to have them. But what are some of the other things? And the endowment helps do that. So what's part of my local story? So some of you on this call may know a guy named David Waltmuth. He passed away now probably 5 or 6 years ago, but David and I were talking, and we knew the story of Shickley and said, you know, we should try something like that in King City. My address is Maysville School District, King City, so try to work with both communities. But David had grown up in King City and then moved back to King City and farmed there, and he'd worked in banking as well. So the two of us just decided, well, let's write a grant or two. We'll see if we can get a matching grant, and we'll start the nucleus of this endowment. And we really didn't do a lot of publicity. Our idea was just, let's see if we can get something started. And over the course of 2 years, we wrote grants and had $25,000 of matching grant money, which we were able to match in the local community. And that gave us over $50,000 of principal. And we had just accomplished that. And then David got sick suddenly and died very suddenly. And so at this point, it's kind of like, wow, what do I do? Because in a sense, it'd just been he and I working on this. Well, we began to put together a board and then began to think more about this endowment. And I'll get into that in just a moment. But David, his estate, he had written in his will that he wanted money to come to the local endowment, which in a sense is what Shickley has tied into. People began to become so in tune with that endowment that they wanted money to go there even after their death. And that's what's happened with David. And so I sure wish David was still here. But even though David's not here, his work in the community continues to help his small town, which is great. So what would be some key points behind endowments? And I'm not necessarily talking just about the one that David and I were tied to, but in general, working with different towns on these types of things. Some key points, I think, is that projects never start at zero. And that's really key. Many projects in small towns never begin because we start with nothing. And it is really a hard lift to begin with nothing. How do you get people to buy in to at least give the first dollar? Well, when you have an endowment, you already have a local source of cash. And so in our case, and in many local endowments cases, you can write a local grant to the local endowment, which is often just like a page, and they might give you your first $1,000, $3,000, whatever it may be. And so now you don't start at zero. And that is so key, because now if you already have some money pledged towards this project, it's much easier to write a grant or go to others and say, you know, this is a $5,000 project or 10 or 20, but we already have 2 or we already have 5 or whatever it may be. It's so much different than going, we don't have anything. Projects that start at zero often stay at zero. It's a hard lift. So it inspires local citizens to begin community projects as well, because now, you know, writing a grant can be daunting, especially if I don't know these folks. But if it's a local grant in a local small town, well, that's so much easier. And so I'm inspired, hey, I could do this. It helps you find additional dollars because you already have some money. So it's now much easier to write a grant. In Northwest Missouri, we often talk about writing grants to some of the U.S. Bank grants in St. Joe, or maybe some of the grants in Chillicothe would be a couple of sources, but there are many. It inspires people then to find the extra dollars. And in a sense, it's a scholarship for your community is how I like to couch it as well. So how do you get this thing to grow? We can start about some of the basics of founding it if we want to do that in the question and answer. But how do you get it to grow? Here are some things based on my experience that I think are important. One is I really like the idea of having a matching grant. Shickley began that way. The banker who had the story and said, hey, we got to keep some of this money in town. The bank put up a local matching grant. And after that, Shickley continued to use successive matching grants. They would either write grants to get a matching grant, whatever they needed to do, but they were always putting out the community of, hey, we've got $100,000, but we only get it if we match it with $100,000. There is so much power in that matching grant. And so that's how we initially started with the $50,000 principal. I've got some more ideas on that if you want to get into that, but having that matching grant, I think, is big. Your biggest contributions are often not local. And Shickley told me it'd be this way, and I am convinced. The size of your town is not what it says on the city limit sign. The size of your town are the total number of people ever touched by that town. So they are all the former alumni, people that once lived there, and so forth. And connecting with them is key. And for better or worse, some of your biggest contributions will come from those folks who moved away. They feel a tie to that place. It helped them get where they are at. And perhaps they even feel a little guilt of, you know, I moved away and I'd like to help the place that helped me. And we have donors right now on auto pay who give every month through the Community Foundation. We have ours set up through the Community Foundation Northwest Missouri, so it's easy to give. And they give on auto pay from the state of Washington, you know, and we're in Missouri, of course. So it amazes me. Using social media to reach all who called home is important as well. So I know a Facebook page isn't that hard, but having a way that people can connect and share, and for the endowment to share what they're doing is important. Trying to fund projects from the start, small ones are fine, is important. So we just had a meeting in Maysville, and Maysville is starting an endowment, has an endowment now. And I really like their approach, different than what David and I did, because when David and I did it, I don't think we knew exactly what to do. But Maysville has theirs set up where they will give money yet this year, I think maybe up to $5,000. So I think that is really important, to have a way that you can be able to give money or give away money in the local community immediately. Celebrate, publicize what's being done. That's important. So as you give grants, to be able to get that out in the paper, social media. And then finally I would suggest having conversations with local attorneys, financial planners, funeral home directors. Those are people who are often in touch with families as they are making decisions about what to do in the future. And even better yet, if you can have some of those folks on a local endowment board, really helps. And it's not that you're trying to take money away from people, but I think it's having a conversation with people about, you know, at some point we will all die, and we probably do have things that are close to our heart. And so how can we help people be able to facilitate that? And for many people, doing something close to home is important to them. And so having those types of conversations is important. Let's see here. For some reason that didn't advance. There we go. So this is an example of some local projects we founded here and locally with the endowment that David and I helped start. The key point from this is you read, I won't read down through every one of them, but you're going to see there's 4 projects and the total cost, and you'll see what the local endowment funded. In many cases, nowhere close to the total funds needed. So I don't know. I would venture to say all but one of these projects would not have begun if it wasn't for the local endowment helping. Maybe they would have, but it would have been hard. So what this helped do is it gave that seed money. Remember when I said you don't start at zero, it's key? That was key. They didn't start at zero, so they could then turn around and go to other organizations, grant funders in the region, whatever it may be, to help do this. So I estimate that many times we get 3 times return on the money. So whatever the local endowment can do, then other people are pitching in to make that happen. And that becomes very key. So here are some ideas on gaining and retaining group members. If you're starting from scratch, or even if you have something started and you're thinking about, well, how do we get the right people? You know, often I hear finding young board members is difficult. And one suggestion I have is instead of thinking so much about, okay, we need this person on there, what skills are important to have on a board? And I think today, you know, having somebody that can do social media or videos or things like that are often skills that even I'm old now, some folks that are younger can do that better. And so maybe you have people in the community and say, you know, would you consider being on our board? Not so much that you got to attend the meetings, but we would love to involve you because you do social media well or videos well, and have a conversation that way. And that's why I put meeting dates and times there. You know, meeting dates and times aren't necessarily, yeah, they're important, but having the right team members and skill members are so important. And now, I mean, one of the byproducts of COVID is we figured out how to do meetings like this, didn't we? And so you may have someone who once lived in the community, but has a wonderful skill set, still connected and would like to help. But if they live an hour and a half away, there's no reason they can't be on the board. Have them Zoom in or have them on the cell phone or whatever it may be. That's a wonderful skill set. And so don't be bound by the city limits or the school district. Certainly you'll want a certain number of people who live within that district. But hey, these are people all pulling for the same thing. And so use Zoom and use the technology to help you find those folks. And that will help you connect with citizens from afar, as I mentioned, like from Washington State, who may give things. Another thing I would highly encourage is if you have a board, even if it's any type of board, community betterment, whatever it may be, I highly encourage you to have a couple of high school students on the board. Go to the local high school and say, you know, we'd love to have 2 high school members, and we'll have a junior and a senior, and that way they serve 2 years, and one's always rotating off and another one comes on. I think it's great to have them there because it's a connection, and you'll learn a lot from hearing their viewpoint. And I like to think that they benefit as well from being a part of the community. And so getting their viewpoint becomes very key in making some of that happen. So here's some things then on how to make it happen. I realize that some of you may have already begun this, some of you may not have, but trying to hit somewhere in the middle here. You know, if you are forming a group, or if you already have a group and are thinking about, well, how do we continue to keep that good core group? I would say diversity of backgrounds is important. So ages, careers, churches, I laugh about that, but it can't be the Baptist thing or the Methodist thing. You just think about through some of those things, and skill sets, that's very important. Matching grant opportunities and donations, we already talked about and discussed, but I think that that's very key as well. And then use a community foundation to get started. And I've referenced that, but let me pause for a second and talk about this. So some folks here probably very familiar with what community foundations can do. In the state of Missouri, somebody could probably tell me, but I think there are probably about 8 to 10 regional community foundations. So in Northwest Missouri, it's the Community Foundation Northwest Missouri. Southwest, South Central Missouri is the Community Foundation of the Ozarks, which does a great job. There's the Community Foundation of Greater Kansas City. These are groups that are there to encourage philanthropy in the region. So we originally, in Maysville, we just had a conversation and they started theirs, set up those endowments underneath the Community Foundation, in this case of Northwest Missouri. And that is a great way in my mind to start, because you don't have to worry about getting a 501c3. You're using theirs. You can use them to handle donations, to send out the IRS letters, the donation letters, acknowledgement. They can help with investing that money. And I put down security as well. Some people will say, well, we need that in the local bank, or have to have local control. I'm not saying that that isn't important, but to me, a huge selling point is that I or this group can't get our hands on the money. It is secure with a regional community foundation whose purpose is to make sure that those funds are there in perpetuity. The community foundation, regional community foundation, has to do what was originally written into those documents. And that should be a source of security for that community to know that if I donate to this, it's not going to somehow leave in some sort of scandal. It's invested and it's secure, and the 501c3 and everything's set up. Now, I will say that for our local endowment here, we eventually went ahead and got our 501c3, but we still have everything at the Community Foundation of Northwest Missouri. But having our local 501c3 allowed us a little more flexibility in some of the donations we could give. But I highly encourage using local community foundations. I just think they do so much to help small towns and endowments to get started. And then simply how to share the message is certainly important as well, is being able to just share that message out through social media and so forth. So let's then look at the final thing, or a couple of final things that I have here. Let's see, that didn't advance there for just a second. There we go. So, what are some of the big projects? Certainly you can see some of them here. I know your last Lunch and Learn, you talked with some of the folks there in Granite Falls. There's just so much that can be done. Facade grants, the Centers for the Arts, Craft Vendor Store, even flower planters and the Early Childhood Learning Center. Many of these are stories that are on our website at totaltownmakeover.com. But local community foundations or local endowments can help make these things happen. So to sum up, build a why not culture. Having people who are positive and realistic. Certainly there are challenges and some of them are difficult to overcome. But if you look at yourself as a big horse and don't think that you're that little horse, that's just so important. defining some of what your top needs are, but also thinking small and large simultaneously. It's great to have large projects, but I highly encourage to have some small ones too, because if the local endowment gets too hung up on building the new swimming pool, and it's a huge project and could take 10 or 20 years, people can begin to lose faith that will happen if they don't see progress. So you could do two things simultaneously. You could have smaller projects happening, but also have the bigger project. And Shickley, in a sense, did that. They had some very large projects. And interestingly, their big challenge right now is a swimming pool. I think that causes a lot of communities troubles. How do I figure out the swimming pool deal? And then build the local giving and support is very key as well. So, you know, when we do those things, I think it helps our roots and where we come from. And that's probably why we're here doing this. And it makes it just not a place where we live, but it makes it home. So I'm going to take questions here, but if you're interested in like the video I just showed, but other videos, if you go to, and that's just I don't know, I need to correct that. It's just totaltownmakeover.com. You'd think I could get my own website right, huh? But for some reason, I didn't update that slide. I got an old slide in here. So it should just be totaltownmakeover.com. And if you click on the resources tab, you'll find videos, and there's also audio and podcast stories there. And then you can see the other information there as well. But that's a great way for you to connect with some of these other towns that are doing this. So let me stop the share here. And I know we've got some time. So if folks have any questions, whether you want to chat or just be able to throw them out here live, that's great as well.
All right, thank you, Andrew. Does anybody have any questions? Okay, so I will toss one out to you then. So what is the process to set up an endowment for a community?
Sure. This is where I think working through the local community foundation, regional community foundation is key, because they're used to doing this. So let's use myself as an example, or Maysville. We'll use that as an example because they began here in the last month. We had a local representative from the community foundation, the executive director, come out, visit with the community. And in many cases, setting something up through the regional community foundation is as simple as signing up some paperwork. And I forget what the initial investment is, but I think it's like $150. It's something very small. And so you have to have, I think, 3 people and sign some paperwork and put the $150 in, and away you go. And that's all that's needed. So again, that's why I like using something like that, because that is quick, easy, and gets you started and gets you going. Whereas if you started with, okay, we got to form a full board and start with a 501c3, I can tell you that we did the 501c3 process, and it cost about $1,000 by the time we did all the lawyers' fees and other fees to the state. And that was on a reduced fee schedule, you know, with a local lawyer. So that's why I like just starting with the Regional Community Foundation and pull 2 or 3 people together that are committed. If you've got more, that's great. But just set up the fund that way, and that's a quick and easy way to get started. And I will say, I have time for questions here, but the other thing I like about that is immediately then when that fund, in fact, I know this is the case with Maysville, who just started a month ago, you can go to the acronym cfnwmo.org, Community Foundation Northwest Missouri. You can immediately start giving online to them. Now, you can give them checks or whatever you want to, but if you'd like to give by credit card or from your bank, it's already set up. And that's just so nice. In fact, now they've even got one of those QR codes, and they can just put that on their website or on Facebook and just scan the code, and poof, you immediately go right to their page. I could get to it by, you know, clicking through, but that takes them directly there. So, and again, Community Foundation of the Ozarks, many of these folks are really good at this. They've been around long enough, and that's their goal. They're there to do this. So that really helps.
Yeah, we have down here, we have Community Foundation of the Ozarks. Let me ask you one thing. So just to clarify, because you probably know this. So if a group sets up an endowment in their community, the Community Foundation takes care of all the bookkeeping, correct?
They do. So, and you can set it up a variety of ways. For us, it just made a lot of sense for them to handle what we would call the back office work. But I can tell you that I can log in and immediately look at the bank account. I can see what's there. I can see who's donated. And then that allows us to write thank you notes folks as well and do all that. And I know as some community endowments grow, sometimes they will begin to take over more of that work just because they have the folks that can do it sometimes. But boy, for a lot of small towns, I think that is great. And yeah, they're going to charge you a little bit. And I think in most cases for ours, it's a 0.5%, I believe. And sometimes that varies a little bit on the fund balance. So as you get bigger, it's not quite as much. But for a 0.5%, I mean, I don't know who we'd have to employ to do all that. So the 0.5% is, I don't want to say it's nothing, but it's very reasonable in my mind for what they do for us.
Okay. Well, really quick before we go any further, if someone wanted to reach out with you with questions, do you have contact information that they could contact you to find out what they could do for an organization there?
Sure. Yeah. So that last slide that I showed there had some of it. Totaltownmakeover.com is the website. You can get to me from there, or email Andrew@andrewmccrea.com is one easy way. Or if you want to find me on Facebook, any of those work pretty well. And I'm always happy to, have an online conversation or, visit over the phone or whatever it may be with folks. So if they have questions, I'm glad to share whatever knowledge and resources I can.
Okay. Well, we appreciate that. Does anybody have any questions? We've got about 15 minutes left.
I might, if anybody does, feel free to jump in. I might just share a couple of other things that sometimes I get asked. I put one of the bullet points there to have conversations with local attorneys, financial planners, and so forth. I do think that that's very important, not only for a local endowment, but also you never know who's in a community and they may want to start their own family foundation. And we've all heard stories where we were surprised by, the little old lady or little old man that, had $2 million. And, I think it's just good to have those types of conversations. In the book, we talk about Chillicothe as an example, and Chillicothe, probably 30-ish years ago, maybe more now, they point back to a meeting they had with local attorneys and financial planners, and they gathered them together and basically talked about the importance of generating local funds for local causes. And that they point to that as being key to a lot of what happens in Chillicothe today, because there were several family foundations that were formed from that. So you have the Litton Foundation, and I forget all the different ones, along with their community foundation. So they have, today we've mostly been talking about just forming a community endowment if you had nothing at all in the community. But then you look at communities like Chillicothe, which granted a little larger, 10,000 people, but I couldn't, count the number of family foundations there. And they will tell you when we start a project, they don't even start anywhere close to zero, because they can have the conversation and several foundations coming together to help supply this. And now, when Richard had that thing about the tax money and we aren't asking you to tax you, if Chillicothe wants to run a bond issue for the school, I know when they built their new school and the new theater and so forth, something to the effect that they went to the community and said, hey, we have enough funds to go ahead and build the theater. If you pass this, we're just going to do everything else. And if you don't, we don't get the theater. Well, gee whiz, it becomes much easier to pass a bond issue when, pass it and we'll give you the free theater. Again, it's just that thing. And that's why matching grants work too. Don't all of us, when we look at something that is 50% off, say, hey, I really want that, and it's 50% off. That's basically what you're doing when you have a local endowment or a matching grant. You've gone to the community and said, the community projects are suddenly on sale. We can give you X%. And in our minds, boy, that is big. Because and Shickley will say, we don't want money to get away. In other words, if somebody, here's the matching grant, boy, I don't want to let that 50,000 leave. I mean, we're going to scrap and work and get that 50,000 raised, because we don't want to miss out on what that matching grant was. And, if some of you are looking for, well, how could I do that? You could write a grant, and there might be some folks willing to grant a matching grant, if that makes sense, which is what we did, or find some families. find some businesses and that believe in this effort and say, would you be willing to pledge X amount over X number of years? And that is our match. And we'll go to the community and say, we have 10 businesses, 10, whoever it is, that have 25,000, whatever the amount is. And we will, if we can match it, we get that money. Think through that. There's different ways that you could approach that, but that can be key. And I will tell you the other thing where that becomes key is I know that we then went to some, let's say, larger businesses that don't have their headquarters in small towns. All right. So like the electric company, those types of things. Mm-hmm. When you go to them and say, hey, we have a matching grant, a local matching grant, and if you give us 2,000, then we get their 2,000. A lot of them will really key in on that. And so now, you know, those big corporations, wherever they may sit, a little more likely to be able to do that. In some cases, not all. Some have such a hierarchy, it's hard to ever get there. But boy, those things help.
Those are great. Does anybody have any questions?
This is Judy with Community Foundation of the Ozarks, and I don't have a question. I just wanted to share a comment with Andrew. He actually spoke at our affiliate conference a few years ago, and unfortunately I can't even remember what year it was because with COVID I've lost track of how to calculate back when something actually happened. But I wanted to just share with you that you inspired someone from one of our affiliates in a little small county. It's an affiliate that is a county distribution, and they have about 19,000 people. And this gentleman is actually one of the donors, and they already had the affiliate set up, so they had an endowment, a community endowment. But he had interest in establishing a scholarship, an endowed scholarship, and was planning to do that, no problem. But some of the things that you happened to say in that presentation inspired him to go back to his community and challenge 9 other people to say, I'm going to do a $100,000 endowed scholarship, and I think that for our community, we should be able to put up $1 million one. And so it was whatever you said that inspired him during that presentation to say that whole concept of match, and that's not really, I mean, that is an example of matching, so to speak,
Sure. But
not really, that really showed them leverage wise in a small community, what kind of impact you can have in a variety of ways. And they really, I encourage you to take a look at Perryville, Missouri on their website. It's a town that has really changed in the last 5 years. And I think that a lot of the things have to do with some of the things of just learning and being inspired by some of the things that you said to go back and do. Not that they aren't capable, communities aren't capable of doing those things, but I think it's just viewing things in a different way and saying, gosh, we just didn't even look at it that way, like the tax dollar thing.
Oh, yeah. Well, thank you very much for what you said. And yeah, it can be just a person going back and challenging everybody else. I mean, that's really key. And I'm glad you mentioned Perry. I was just thinking about Perryville today. I mean, that's just a town that said, hey, we aren't little. and after a while, people believe that. And it was probably true all along, and it's just building that synergy. And I think sometimes it's so hard. And some of us on this call know what it's like. It feels like such a burden on our shoulders that we feel like we're lifting alone. But you get the folks working together and you begin to spin this. And you know, Shickley is probably 35 years down the tracks now on theirs. I can tell you our local one now is 8 years down the tracks. Maysville's just a month in. It builds. I mean, we know what compounding interest and things do and telling the story. And, you know, sometimes it just takes a little time, but those things happen. They do. It just takes a little encouragement sometimes.
All right. Does anybody else have anything for Andrew? We've got about 7 minutes left. Well, let me, because we're in the Community Foundation of the Ozarks region, excuse me, and I know we have a local group that has set up a giving circle. Do you see a lot of those in your area of that kind of thing?
You know, I haven't, but that doesn't mean that that's not a great idea. I think it really is. And, you know, for folks that are interested, I didn't put this website up on the slide, but if you go to farmingthecountryside.com, that's our weekly podcast. It's a weekly radio show on some radio stations. if you scroll back, and I should have the number up here, and eventually it will post a total town makeover. I don't think it's on there right yet.
Mhm.
We focus, this is going to be about 2 months ago, go to Perry, Iowa, and they have something similar where it's the 100 plus for Perry. And it is a group of folks that come together, and they will give at least, they've all committed to giving $100 per quarter to a local group, and they give a presentation every quarter, and they walk through all the dynamics of it, but it has to be a local group, and it's people within the group that give the presentation. No PowerPoint, no nothing, just stand up, talk about it, and then the group votes. And so every quarter, their membership, every person writes a check for $100 to whatever organization that is. So, you know, that's not necessarily a local endowment, but it is a way that is doing some similar things. I like the endowment approach because then you have the core that is in a sense working forever, but there's no reason that you couldn't do that, plus have this type of giving circle, or in this case, the 100 plus for Perry, whatever you want to call it, and have a group of people coming together to give locally. Now, Perry's a little bit larger. I think they may be around 8,000 or so now. They're almost becoming a bedroom community of Des Moines, even though they were the little small farm town at one time. But I think those can work really well as well.
All right, does anybody have anything else? Because if not, we'll go ahead and wrap up. I do want to thank you, Andrew, for joining us today and sharing your knowledge about endowments and the community foundation in our area. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We will have our next Lunch and Learn on June. Let me pull up the calendar here. June 15th. We'll have speaker information for you here in the next week or so, but we will be doing these on the third Wednesday of every month at noon. So we encourage you to join us. And if you have a topic of suggestion for one of our Lunch and Learns, reach out to us. Our email is on the website. You can email any of the board members directly with that information. We appreciate you joining us today, and we'll see you next month then. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you. Okay. Bye.
Bye.